Just 1 minute ago, shocking news rippled across Britain and beyond. Prince William, heir to the throne and future King of England, has moved his family out of the palace. For centuries, royal residences have stood as symbols of stability, tradition, and continuity. To see the Prince of Wales take such a dramatic step has left the nation stunned, sparking urgent questions about what is truly happening behind the gilded walls of the monarchy. This is not simply a matter of relocating homes. To the British people, every move by William carries a weight far greater than personal preference. He is not only Diana's son, but also the man many believe will restore the monarchy's dignity in the face of modern scandals. So why would he suddenly remove Princess Catherine and their children from the very heart of royal life? Was it an act of defiance, a bid for protection, or a statement against the rising tensions within the House of Windsor? Rumors swirl that growing rifts with King Charles and Queen Camilla may have reached a breaking point. Others whisper about Catherine's health and the need to shield the children from relentless public scrutiny. Still, some believe this decision signals something much larger, a shift in how William envisions the monarchy's future, one that prioritizes family over formality, privacy over pageantry. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the nation is watching with bated breath. Has the next king just drawn an invisible line between himself and the old ways of the crown? Or is this only the beginning of a deeper crisis that threatens to shake the royal family to its very core? Tonight, Imemo, we uncover the possible reasons, the untold stories, and the shocking implications of Prince William's unprecedented move, the midnight departure. The palace, long regarded as the very heart of royal power, is a place where every footstep echoes with centuries of history. Yet on this night, when its hallowed halls became the stage for an act no one expected. Just after midnight, when the world outside London was cloaked in silence, Prince William led Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis out of the palace gates. Their departure was quiet, almost invisible to the untrained eye. But to those within the walls, it was nothing short of a thunderclap. The family carried no royal procession, no flashing lights, no ceremonial guards. Instead, their exit was marked by hurried footsteps, hushed whispers, and the stunned expressions of a few aides who happened upon the scene. These were staff who had sworn their lives to discretion, people trained to anticipate the smallest royal move. And yet, they were caught entirely unprepared. There had been no warning, no leaked schedule, not even a shadow of rumor. In an institution where secrets are currency, the silence surrounding William's departure was deafening. By dawn, the shock reverberated beyond the palace walls. Whispers spread like wildfire. William, the heir to the throne, had not left for an official engagement or overseas duty. He had walked away from the palace itself, his wife and children by his side. To some insiders, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. The palace was not just a residence. It was a fortress of tradition, a gilded cage that had kept monarchs bound for centuries. By leaving it so deliberately, William sent a message far louder than any public speech. He would no longer be chained to the suffocating expectations of the crown. For the royal household left behind, it was a moment of betrayal and liberation all at once. Some aides stood frozen in disbelief. Others scrambled to alert senior officials. But none could deny what they had just witnessed, a break in history itself. Within hours, headlines screamed across the globe. Was this a rebellion, a family crisis, or could it be the first step toward abdication? In that fleeting midnight walk, William transformed from a parent to a man on a mission, whether to protect his family, to protest the palace, or to defy his father. One truth was clear: nothing in the monarchy would ever be the same again. Stay tuned. What seemed sudden was really years of hidden tension between father and son. Breaking with the king's vision. William's departure from the palace did not erupt in a single night, and it was the result of years of frustration building beneath the surface. To the world, the monarchy appeared united, polished, and unshakable. But behind the heavy doors of gilded chambers, father and son clashed over what the future crown should represent. William had long envisioned a monarchy that breathed with the rhythm of modern Britain, less rigid, more connected, and willing to show its humanity. He believed the crown's survival depended on transparency and sincerity. Yet whenever he raised these ideas, they were brushed aside. Tradition, Charles insisted, was the monarchy's greatest armor. To William, that same armor was beginning to feel like a coffin. Meetings that should have been moments of mentorship often turned into quiet battlegrounds. William would put forward reform proposals, greater access to the public, a shift toward compassion over protocol, only to watch his father dismiss them with a wave of the hand. It wasn't the rejection of ideas alone that cut deep, but the message beneath it, that William's role was not to shape, but to wait. And then there was the matter of loyalty. Increasingly, Charles leaned on Camilla's counsel, her voice echoing louder in decisions that should have belonged to the heir. For William, still carrying the memory of his mother as a guiding star, this was more than a personal slight. It was a wound reopened again and again. To see his father place faith elsewhere left him feeling not only sidelined, but betrayed. Having been lucky enough to meet some of our country's amazing charities and organizations, Catherine, ever the steadying hand, often urged patience. She reminded William that the throne had never come easily to any generation, that endurance was as much a crown as the jewel itself, but the weight on his shoulders only grew heavier. Each dismissal, each moment of invisibility etched a quiet rebellion into his heart. So when the midnight walk finally came, it was not a sudden rebellion, but the inevitable end of a long struggle. William's break from the palace was also a break from his father's vision, a refusal to inherit a crown bound in chains of the past. He was ready to redefine what monarchy could mean, even if it meant defying the king himself. The shadow of Camilla. For William, the palace was never just home. It was a battlefield of memory. Every corridor whispered his mother's name. Every gilded frame reminded him of a woman adored by the public yet broken by the crown. And in the very space where Diana's absence loomed largest, another figure grew ever more dominant, Camilla. What began as a quiet presence at Charles's side evolved into something far more unsettling. Camilla was no longer simply the king's companion. She had become a voice that carried weight in state discussions, family disputes, and even matters of public image. Her influence seeped into corners once reserved for the heir, and with every passing season, William felt the ground beneath him shrinking. It wasn't only her counsel to Charles that unsettled him. It was the way her family began sliding into royal circles with increasing prominence. At events where tradition once dictated Windsor bloodlines stood firm, Camilla's grandchildren began to appear, smiling for cameras, introduced to the world as though they were heirs themselves. To outsiders, it may have seemed harmless, even endearing. To William, it was a rewriting of history in real time, an intrusion upon the legacy he was raised to embody. Catherine noticed it too. She stood beside William at engagements, offering her graceful composure even when Camilla's gestures cut sharply. A subtle remark here, a patronizing smile there, small acts that in isolation could be brushed aside, but together painted a clear picture. Camilla was not content to remain in the backgrounds. She was actively reshaping the monarchy's image, and William's family was being quietly pushed to the margins. For a man still haunted by his mother's treatment, this was not merely political, it was personal. William saw echoes of the same struggle Diana had faced, the same sense of being silenced and overshadowed. Except now it was not his mother, but his wife and children who risked being diminished. The idea that Camilla could influence not only the crown, but also the environment in which his children were raised was intolerable. This wasn't rivalry in the open sense. It was subtler, colder, and in some ways more dangerous. Camilla rarely needed to raise her voice. Her power lay in the quiet shaping of perception, The gentle but firm redirection of Charles's attention, and with each decision that favored her, William felt himself pushed further into the shadows. It was this creeping realization that the monarchy was being restructured around Camilla's image that hardened William's resolve. He could no longer stand by as his mother's memory was sidelined and his children's future written by a woman who had once been the very source of Diana's sorrow. The shadow of Camilla had grown too long, and William knew it was time to step out from beneath it. But could one remark really expose the tension William had long tried to contain? Keep watching to see how a single moment shattered the royal silence. The remark that shattered silence. Every royal gathering carries an invisible weight. The polished silver, the carefully chosen seating, the choreographed smiles. Each detail designed to project harmony, even when harmony is absent. But at one particular dinner, meant to display unity to the outside world, a single remark cracked the facade wide open. It began with light conversation, the usual rehearsed pleasantries that roll off royal tongues with practiced ease. Advisors, senior royals, and family members sat arranged around a long table where every glance could shift headlines. William and Catherine kept their composure, aware that even the smallest gesture would be dissected by those watching closely. But beneath the surface, the tension was already thick. And then it happened. With a smirk and a casual tone sharpened over years of court survival, Camilla made a passing comment that sliced through the air like a blade. Her words dismissed Diana, not just as a memory, but as a force that still lived in the public's heart. To others, it may have sounded like an offhand joke, a throwaway line meant to lighten the mood. But for William, it was something far darker, a direct insult to the woman who had defined his childhood and whose absence he still carried as a wound. The room seemed to freeze. Catherine, seated nearby, felt the sting instantly. She had spent years honoring Diana's memory, enduring the inevitable comparisons while quietly embodying her grace. To hear her legacy diminish so casually and in front of her children was unbearable. For a fleeting second, Catherine's composure faltered, her face betraying the quiet devastation Camilla's words had caused. But it was William who reacted most visibly. He glanced toward George and Charlotte, who were seated within earshot, their wide eyes betraying that they had understood far more than anyone had hoped. Even little Louis sensed the shift, the sudden heaviness that filled the room. William's fury ignited not only at the insult to his mother, but at the cruelty of letting his children witness such disdain. He turned to his father, silently demanding a rebuke, a line drawn in defense of Diana's name. But Charles remained silent, his eyes fixed downward, his lips pressed tight. That silence was more painful than Camilla's words. It was confirmation of where his loyalty truly lay. The scrape of William's chair against the polished floor echoed louder than any response. He stood, his jaw set, and walked out without another word. For those left behind, the silence was suffocating. For William, it was the final straw. Preparing the escape, William's departure from the palace may have appeared sudden, but in truth, it was anything but impulsive. Long before the midnight walk shook the nation, quiet preparations had been unfolding in the shadows. Every detail was planned with precision, not by aides or courtiers, but by William himself, an heir who had grown weary of being watched, managed, and controlled. He knew the walls of the palace were lined with eyes and ears, and secrecy was his greatest weapon. So while the world assumed he was following routine, William was quietly securing something the monarchy could not control, his own place of refuge. It was no ordinary retreat. The estate he chose was bound to his mother's memory, a property steeped in connections to Diana's past. To outsiders, it was just land, stone, and trees. To William, it was freedom, an escape from the suffocating traditions that had claimed so much of his family. In the weeks before the eruption, he made discreet visits under the cover of official duties. He walked the grounds in silence, imagining had his children running without the constant flash of cameras or the stiff choreography of palace life. He envisioned Catherine finally breathing in peace, far from the endless comparisons and the subtle undermining she endured within royal halls. This estate would not just be a new home, it would be a sanctuary. Every arrangement was deliberate. Security was placed on quiet standby, instructed under vague terms to avoid suspicion. Trusted staff members were told only fragments of the plan, never enough to piece together the whole picture. Even his closest aides had no inkling of the scale of what William was preparing. By the time Camilla's remarks shattered the last of his patience, William was ready. The keys were in hand, the estate prepared, the exit route decided. He hadn't merely stormed out of a dinner. He had walked straight into a future he had already built in secret. And when he led his family out beneath the cover of night, their destination was not random. Every path, every stone at that estate echoed with Diana's presence. By taking his wife and children there, William wasn't just leaving the palace. He was reclaiming his mother's dream of freedom, a dream he now intended to make their reality. But what happens when reclaiming his mother's dream threatens the very crown he was born to inherit? Keep watching to find out. Panic in the palace. By the time the first whispers of William's midnight departure leaked into the press, the palace was already in turmoil. Courtiers rushed through dimly lit corridors, phones pressed to their ears, voices low but urgent. For an institution built on the illusion of stability, the optics were disastrous. The heir to the throne had walked away without warning, and the cameras were already circling. The first order of business was damage control. Draft statements were written and rewritten, each one trying to frame the exodus as harmless. A temporary arrangement. One version read, another suggested a period of rest and privacy. Words like family time and well-being were tested and discarded, each deemed too weak to mask what the world already sensed, a rupture inside the monarchy itself. Charles was at the center of the storm. His aides urged him to act quickly, to project authority before the narrative spun out of control. But the king was paralyzed by conflict. To defend William would be to undermine Camilla, whose presence had already sparked controversy. To defend Camilla would risk alienating his son and, worse, the future of the crown. Every path seemed to lead toward division. Meanwhile, as factions within the palace began to emerge, some staff whispered sympathy for William, praising his courage to stand against suffocating tradition. Others sided fiercely with Charles and Camilla, arguing that loyalty to the crown meant quashing any hint of rebellion, even from the heir himself. The atmosphere grew icy, corridors once humming with routine now vibrating with suspicion. Outside the palace walls, the press frenzy only deepened. Every evasive statement was dissected, every silence interpreted as proof of chaos. What had begun as a family crisis now threatened to swell into a constitutional one. For the monarchy, the problem was no longer just William's absence. It was the image of a crown crumbling under the weight of its own fractures. And the longer the silence dragged on, the louder the nation asked the question the palace feared most. Had the future king just rejected the institution itself? Let's find out. Shielding the children. For William, the choice to leave the palace was not just about breaking away from his father or rejecting tradition. At its heart, it was about three young faces, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Every decision, every risk came down to them. He knew better than anyone what it meant to grow up behind palace walls. He remembered the endless scrutiny, the constant rehearsals for a life he had not chosen, cameras capturing smiles that weren't real, questions from strangers who thought they knew him, and the suffocating knowledge that every mistake would be magnified 1,000 times. William had lived it all, and he refused to let history repeat itself. George, as the eldest, was already beginning to feel the weight of expectation. His appearances were choreographed, his gestures analyzed as though he were a man, not a boy of school age. William saw the worry flicker across his son's face when questions about the crown crept into conversations meant for children. That shadow was far too familiar, and it made William's resolve unshakable. Charlotte carried a different burden. Her charm and poise, celebrated by the public, were often used by the palace as a shield during times of tension, a smiling distraction from deeper cracks in the monarchy. William and Catherine watched closely, determined to remind her that she was more than a symbol, that her spark was her own, not something to be packaged for headlines. And then there was Louis, the youngest, untouched for now, still free to laugh without consequence. To William, his innocence was a glimpse of what childhood should be. Protecting that joy became a mission in itself. Catherine shared her husband's determination. Together they agreed to methanai danhin swan. Their children would not grow up as pawns in an institution that valued duty over happiness. Leaving the palace was not rebellion for its own sake. It was a father's vow and a mother's promise. The Windsor children would not inherit scars carved by tradition. They would inherit freedom, a nation divided. By morning, Britain was split in two. News of William's midnight walk with his family dominated every headline, every broadcast, every conversation, whispered in cafes and echoed across office corridors. The heir to the throne had left the palace, and no explanation had been offered. For many, it felt as if the very ground beneath the monarchy had shifted. Crowds gathered outside royal residences, carrying placards not for the king, but for William. Their chants echoed through the streets, "Protect the children," and "William for the people." To these supporters, his act was not defiance, but courage. They saw in him a father willing to put family before duty, a leader prepared to strip away the heavy cloak of tradition, to stand for something more human. To them, this was the breath of authenticity the monarchy had been missing for years. Yet, across the nation, voices of outrage rose just as loudly. Older loyalists, still anchored to memories of Queen Elizabeth's steadfast reign, branded William's actions reckless and selfish. To them, his departure threatened not just family unity, but the stability of the crown itself. The monarchy, they argued, was bigger than personal grievances. Walking away from its walls, even symbolically, was tantamount to betrayal. Beyond Britain's shores, the reaction was even more dramatic. American outlets hailed William and Catherine as reformers, likening their departure to a modern stand for freedom. European papers, however, dissected the move as a looming constitutional crisis, questioning whether Charles could maintain authority. Across the Commonwealth, debate raged. Was this the beginning of renewal or the first step toward collapse? The speculation only intensified with each passing hour. Some claimed William was preparing to renounce his royal duties entirely, effectively abdicating before even wearing the crown. Others insisted this was merely a calculated warning to his father, a show of power designed to force change within palace walls. Conspiracy theories flourished online, with social media amplifying every rumor until fact and fiction blurred into one. And through it all, one truth became clear. The monarchy no longer spoke with one voice. Britain was witnessing, perhaps for the first time in living memory, a crown divided against itself. Where some saw William as a symbol of hope, others saw him as the spark of potential ruin. The nation was torn, and the world was watching. Could William's silence hide a revelation powerful enough to shake the crown? Stay tuned as his long-awaited words finally break through. William speaks out. Days of silence had left Britain restless. Speculation reached fever pitch. Commentators filled airwaves with theories, and every household seemed to echo with the same question. Why had William walked away? When the cameras finally switched on and William appeared, standing with Catherine at his side, the nation collectively held its breath. He did not speak as a prince rehearsing royal platitudes, but as a man stripped of ceremony. His voice was steady yet heavy with emotion. "I will not raise my children in an environment that values image above truth," he declared. "Their future deserves honesty, compassion, and freedom." things no crown should take away. His words landed not as polished rhetoric, but as a raw vow, echoing in the hearts of parents who understood exactly what he meant. Then came the moment that silenced even his critics. William invoked the memory of his mother, not as a distant figure confined to history, but as a guiding light. "My mother taught me that love must outweigh duty," he said. Her lesson was clear, that silence in the face of wrong is itself a kind of betrayal. I cannot and I will not allow that silence to shape my children's lives. The mention of Diana was like striking a bell that reverberated through the crowd and across the nation. Catherine's presence beside him made the declaration even more powerful. She spoke no words, but her steady gaze and calm composure reinforced that this was not William's stand alone. It was a united front. Their partnership radiated strength, a contrast to the fractured image within the palace walls. And then, as if to anchor his message, the children appeared briefly at his side. George solemn, Charlotte composed, Louis wide-eyed and innocent. They were not heirs, not symbols, but simply children whose father had just vowed to protect them. At that moment, William did not just challenge the palace. He redefined what it meant to lead, not through tradition or titles, but through courage and truth. The monarchy, as Britain had known it, could never return to what it was before.